Without rapid recovery, all of our other goals will be compromised. There will be no prospect of reducing medium-term budget deficits while simultaneously increasing investment in human capital. No prospect of competing successfully and remaining an example to the rest of the world. No prospect of restoring growing living standards for the American middle class. And above all, no prospect of putting 8 million people who should have jobs back to work. In the decade prior to the current downturn, the American household and business sectors, if you added them together, spent close to 2% of GDP more than they earned. They were net borrowers. As a consequence of the developments of recent years, this situation has changed dramatically. Private spending now falls nearly 6% short of private sector income. That means the private sector has swung in its deficit by about 7.5%, from a 2% deficit from about a 2% deficit to a little less than a 6% surplus. That swing, all of which means less demand, is one way of understanding why we are suffering the aftermath of the worst recession in 50 years. It is right and necessary for government to counteract private sector deleveraging. Even with all the fiscal measures of the last several years, total borrowing in the American economy has failed to grow for the last 2 years. That is the first 2-year period since the Second World War when total borrowing in the American economy has not increased. Let me be clear. Even with our deficits, the deficits have fallen short. They, of course, mean extra debt. But the amount of extra debt is less than the amount of reduced borrowing by the private sector. Increased federal borrowing has offset, but only partially, deleveraging in the private sector. Now, the extraordinary gap that I referenced a moment ago has opened up between private saving and private investment. The tax compromise will help, but it's not enough. At a time when real interest rates, even over 30 years, are less than 2%. At a time when construction unemployment is nearly 20%. At a time when building material costs are substantially depressed by lack of demand. What better time to invest in renewing and upgrading our nation's infrastructure?